responsibilities that make this program possible.
Hello and welcome to Commons Current Events Roundtable. Today I have a really exciting guest, and our program is called Egypt Today, but it's really also facts and fictions of mainstream media. There is a lot that has come out about Egypt, and we only hear one way. The way that our mainstream media is showing what Egypt is doing, and it looks like a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos there. But we're going to know today what really is coming from Egypt, because I have Dr. Jala, I did it again, Dr. Jala Sherbini. Pronounce your name for us so we can do
Jala
that.
Sherbini.
Okay, Jala Sherbini, who is a professor of political science at Oakton Community College, who is Egyptian, half Egyptian, and half Turkish. I just found out today that she's half Turkish as well. And we're going to be talking about what really is going on. And right now we know that the Arab Spring has replaced the harsh order of hated dictators with a flowering of neophyte democracies. But these governments with weak mandates, ever-shifting loyalties, and poor security forces has made the regions a more chaotic and unstable place, a place more susceptible than ever to rogue provocateurs, fomenting violent upheavals, usually in the name of faith. Is the Middle East more dangerous now? Does American life come in harm's way as violent protesters rage across the Middle East? Has the Arab Spring become the Arab Winter? To answer these questions today, that's why I have Dr. Sherbini come in and really talk about what really is happening. This sounds like a lot of chaos, right? And one of the interesting things that has come up was a friend of mine just recently came back from Egypt. She is around my age. She's very short, and she's also Jewish. And we were all concerned, oh my God, you're going to Egypt, what's going to happen? When they find out who you are, they're going to string you up and you're never going to come back. And she said she had the most wonderful time. The people were friendly. I said, what about all the fighting that's going on? She said, what fighting? I didn't see any. So what really, I read this whole thing in the beginning of the show. I want to know really, from your standpoint, when you've seen, you have family that's still there, what really is happening in Egypt today?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start by saying it is my pleasure to be here with you, Suzanne, to talk about Egypt, which is a subject very dear to me because I am originally from Egypt. I have lived in the United States for over 20 years. And I consider the United States my country too, my second country. And so what is happening in Egypt is very important to me. And I see Egypt right now going through a transition. And many things are happening, are changing, things that we were not used to. For the first time, as Egyptians, we have the right to speak out our mind, to protest, to demonstrate, to basically challenge the powers that be. This is something that we never had before. Especially during Mubarak's reign. For 30 years, we had a dictator who was basically telling us what to do, what to say, and if we went against the norm or the interests of his and his ruling party, then there were severe consequences. So in the big picture, Egypt is going through a wonderful transition. But when nations go through transitions like what is happening in Egypt, it is a scary thing. You don't know what's going to happen, whether this change is going to be positive, that there are going to be negative aspects of that change. And so everyone, including people in the United States and in the West in general, are skeptical When you have known, Egypt has always been a strong ally of the United States, and definitely Mubarak for a very long time. And so the idea that the new powers in office right now, will they divert from the course that we are used to, whether it's in their policy towards the United States? What will their policies be towards Egyptians as well? So there are a lot of questions to be asked. In terms of...
And also, about the Muslim, we're very concerned here in the United States. We always hear, oh my goodness, the Muslim Brotherhood is taking over. And, it's like, oh my God, the Muslim Brotherhood. Are they as bad? And is there factions in Muslim Brotherhood? And, some of the things of what, are they Islamists? Or what actually, who are the Muslim Brotherhood? And I know that President Morsi, he was the president of the Muslim Brotherhood for what, about 30 years?
The party leader.
The party leader. Okay, the party leader. And now he is president of Egypt. And, what is he going to bring? Is it, to the Egyptian people? In fact, I was just reading from, my friend came in Egypt Today. I have a copy of Egypt Today. Very excited about my copy. And it says that one of the things that Morsi hasn't yet fulfilled any of his promises toward women, and the new cabinet right now only has 2 female ministers overseeing scientific research and insurance and social affairs. And right now, so far, women still haven't gotten into the cabinet. So is this a problem? Do you see the Muslim Brotherhood as somebody, a group that's going to be for women, or what exactly, who are the Muslim Brotherhood? And maybe you can tell me a little bit the myths that we're seeing. Are they a bad group of people? Are they a positive group of people? And how do they view women?
Well, I wanted to answer your questions by just going just back to the issue of your friend and tying it with the Muslim Brotherhood, because again, amid some of the chaos that had happened, especially at the beginning of the uprisings, people were afraid, especially women, and going to Egypt, wondering whether or not there will be safe or secure. And as your friend said, she didn't see anything that made her afraid or so forth, because in general, Egyptians are very friendly. They don't necessarily look in terms of men and women. If she's a tourist, if she's a foreigner, they will show her respect, and as a matter of fact, they'll be friendly and want to help her. But again, amid the misconceptions, the media hype, the chaos that happened at the beginning of the uprising, it is understandable that people would be afraid, and especially women, if not anything, to go to Egypt. As for the Muslim Brotherhood, and again, I go back and I sometimes blame the media for just focusing on certain parts, or sometimes maybe exaggerating the negative over the positive. The Muslim Brotherhood today, the party as we see it, is very different than what we know of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the days. So in other words, it's not your grandfather's Muslim Brotherhood. It's a new breed, and the reason for that is that within the party itself, you're starting to see two groups. You've got the younger generations, not necessarily that they're more educated, but they are the generation of Facebook. Yeah. They're the generation of the new technologies. They do hold strongly to definitely some of the main ideologies of the party, but they are, think of them, if you will, as the moderates. They are the reformists. They're not the hardliners of the old Muslim Brotherhood. So in regard to the Muslim Brotherhood in general, if you look at it in the bigger picture, you might be worried, because you might say, well, if I read the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, I will see that at one point in their history, they advocated violence. They take hard positions against women, for example. They do have some stances where they would like to see Sharia law being the main law in Egypt. So if you look at the big picture, you might be worried.
This is the older generation.
This is the new generation is very different. They are more open.
Because we go to rifts in the Muslim Brotherhood. So,
yes, so
we get headlines all the time.
Yes.
So we learn a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood.
They are more like right now. What's going on in Egypt is that since President Morsi is no longer the leader of the party, there are two leaders that are running for that position, and so you have on one side one Khatani, who tends to be more of the hardliner, the old school, and then El Arian, who tends to be more of the reformist, the new school. The younger generation would like to see El Arian being, the new leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, the new face of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Because he represents them.
Because he's the reformist, he's the moderate,
Right.
he's someone who wants to include women. He talks about he identifies with the younger generation's issues, unemployment, poverty, things of that nature. Whereas the hardliners are still focused on some of the old ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood and so forth. So if you want to define the Muslim Brotherhood right now, it is something you've got to wait and see what's going to happen. It's not and the media, unfortunately, what they do is that they tend to label the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of what they were, but
because they don't have the Brotherhood has shed a long time positions such as favoring the abrogation, which is the abolishment or annulment of the Egypt's peace treaty with Israel. What do you feel is going to happen? Because Egypt has always had, a peace treaty with Israel
since '78.
Yes, and they
Camp David Accords.
Right, exactly. And the Muslim Brotherhood has not had that. They've always, I guess. Will you feel that they will keep the peace treaty? Because, we talked about earlier that I know there's a lot of trips go to Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan. Israel and, they both have the tourisms, and I think it's so important to keep that. And and you feel that, that this is the old school of Muslim Brotherhood. Do you feel that they will keep the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt the way it was?
Well, the Camp David Accords, which were really a breakthrough started the whole, positive relationship between Egypt and Israel that was brokered by Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the time and President Sadat and Jimmy Carter, was really something in the best favor of both Israel and Egypt. It has some provisions that are still controversial, and that is sometimes these provisions are what some of the hardliners usually would refer to, and so forth. But it is as President Morsi has come out and said that he is not going to violate the treaty. He is basically going to keep the accords as they are and has no interest whatsoever to change that. What is happening in the Muslim Brotherhood, again, is due to some of the provisions that some of the hardliners are taking this sometime as a way to gain ground, gain support with their followers, for example, who tend to see, unfortunately, despite a positive treaty that's been over 30 years intact, identify Israel still as an enemy. And despite diplomatic relations, despite trade relations,
there is an enemy, yet they trade together.
Exactly.
They trade more with their enemies than they do with
Israeli
else. Right.
embassy with an Israeli flag in one of the major suburbs in Cairo. We've got Israeli tourists coming to Egypt.
And you have Egyptian Jews that still
and
live
we've got
in Egypt.
a small, but I would say to agree or disagree, significant Jewish population, even though small. So the idea is, at this point, it is not in the best interest of Israel, and it's not in the best interest, definitely, of Egypt to do anything. What sometimes, if the Camp David Accords come out, it's just for its political theater, from my perspective, and at this time, no one can afford to break this off or to violate that. Right after the uprisings, when the Supreme Military Council took over, one of the first things that they said, even when they were in charge, they said the Camp David Accords will stay intact. And then later on, when Morsi became president, he basically said the same thing. So at this point, I don't see anything. I see the Camp David sometimes being used as a ploy, and only time will show if Morsi means what he says, or if not. It's definitely, if something were to violate that treaty, it's not going to end well for specifically Egyptians.
Because they're also trade partners with the United States as well, and they want to,
And it's all,
so it all goes
the United
together.
States is not going to be
Right.
happy. Israel's not going to be happy. It's going to have serious implications on Egypt. So at this point, I don't see it being an issue of concern.
Now, this may be some naivety on my part, but I still don't understand, because I'm trained in the United States, so I always feel everything, we're taught that everything in the United States, everything Americans do is so positive around the world, and everybody should love us, okay? And right now, the world is, there's explosion of anti-Americanism from Tunisia to Lebanon and to Libya that you just saw recently, in schools, businesses, diplomatic facilities set ablaze, the black flag of Salafism,
Yes.
of which Al-Qaeda is prominent element raised over the embassies in Tunisia, Yemen, Sudan, and Egypt. Why is there such hatred for Americans? I mean, we're taught that we're so good to them, we give money to them. Why do they hate us so much? What has Americans done, or the United States government? Because usually the people get along together. We talked about that earlier at our lunch, that we know so many people, that there's several people that we know that they get it from different faiths, from different, I had on one of my shows here, I had an Israeli young man and I had a Palestinian, and after the show they took their email addresses, they're on each other's Facebook, and then they're going to see each other once they get back to their country. And they said that their government keeps them apart. Is it our governments that are keeping us apart? What is the Americans doing to have this uprising in all these other countries?
Well, I think you mentioned why do they hate us, or so forth. I really don't think that the people, if we're talking about the people of Egypt specifically, people of Egypt don't hate Americans and do not hate America. All you have to do is go down to Egypt and Cairo and take a look around, and within maybe a mile block you will see a Starbucks, a McDonald's, a Hardee's, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, an Arby's, a PJ Fridays.
I'm coming there.
A Chili's. I mean, American culture is everywhere, and in Egypt, people like to watch American shows. They like the American movies. They welcome the American tourists when they come to visit Egypt. So in reality, the average Egyptian does not hate the Americans or America. What they disagree with is United States foreign policies and policies of the United States towards the Middle East. Sometimes what they perceive is a kind of hypocrisy, if you will, where the United States tends to be, harsher on, Egypt or on, the leaders in the Middle East than it is with the West or leaders of other nations. That sometimes they use the aid as leverage. For example, will provide you with economic aid or military aid.
Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, it is true, but
Yes.
sometimes the price is too high. And if the price, when you had Mubarak, for example, Mubarak basically towards the end of his tenure, or a big chunk of his tenure, was basically whatever the United States wanted, he would do, even if it was against the interests of his people. So his people were suffering, there were a lot of issues going on, and yet what he really wanted to do was appease the United States government. And people see that, and so it's a very complicated issue. So eventually they start, what you see when they go and demonstrate or burn an American flag or attack an embassy or so forth, it's really manifestation against the government and not necessarily the people, or in specifically the policies of the government. They would like to see a leveled playing field. They would like to see United States treat the leaders and treat them the same way they treat others. So
So they feel that they're not being treated
equally.
Like an equal partner. It's like telling, like if I have the money and you're, my granddaughter or something like that, and I'm telling you this, I'll give you the money to go to college if you do this, this, and this, and this. So, and sometimes I think one of our politicians said maybe it's best we get rid of giving money to all these countries, and maybe it would be better for them in a way, because then they can do what they want to do when they want to do it. And sometimes when you take money from other people, that's when people start telling you what you can do and what you cannot do. And I think that in itself. So when you take money, there's always, like they said, no free lunch. But if you don't take the money, you could do as you choose. And I think Israel has some of the same points like that too against the United States, because they're telling them what they can and what they cannot do.
Of course,
and of course they're getting arms and different things from.
Whenever
the United
you're the you need the money, you need the aid, and so basically, and especially in Egypt, in certain times where that aid has helped a lot. And so it's not a matter of an optional thing. Should we or shouldn't we take the aid? We need the aid, and so. But it doesn't mean that we have to, basically abide or adhere to every whim of the United States. But
so you think that is one of the problems.
And also, you could also look at this from a historical point of view. Colonization has had a huge impact on countries in the Middle East, like in Egypt, for example. There is still some embedded ideas, animosity towards the West or the Western civilization and culture and so forth, where sometimes people feel that the West treats the East as inferior, and hence this kind of, again, manifests itself in some of the violence that you see. So it's a really complicated issue. It's not just as clear as they hate us just because we're Americans. No, they don't hate you because you're Americans.
What about their views? Like the Islamic extremists have a view and want to impose their views in the world, and America stands in their way. Is that part of it? Or also, could it be that sometimes the West, the kids, they don't respect their parents anymore, call their parents like we did. I used to take my mother out once a week. My goodness, if I waited to be taken out once a week, I better not hold my breath. But, so maybe part of that is also they see the West and the kids not respecting elders anymore, and all the videos that, all these chaotic and videos that these children watch, and porn and all kinds of things that is coming across American television. I wonder if they're concerned that that's going to get into their country and they're going to be part of this too, because we're very lax in some of this.
And I think that you're absolutely true, especially conservatives or ultra-conservatives who see things in black and white. They want, people, whether the younger generation, especially the younger generation, to abide by the rules. They believe that if the younger generation are acting up like that, or showing maybe not necessarily disrespect, but not really listening to their parents, that is because they are seeing these things on television, imported from the West, that these are not the traditional values of an Egyptian culture, which tends to be conservative, or religion, or so forth. And so, of course, they blame the West for that. So a lot of, you have some of the, especially the ultra-conservative Salafites or so forth, they're very traditional people. They follow the scripture within the Quran, and this is, even though Quran is up for interpretation. I mean, there are many schools of thought that have interpreted the Quran in different ways.
Suicide bombers and that type of thing.
In the scripture itself. So they tend to take it word for word, and they don't have any flexibility there. And these are, the kind of people that are basically going to look at the West and going to look at the United States and say, well, everything negative happening in our country is because of you, and because our traditions, our religion, or so forth, based on their own interpretation, does not advocate that.
So you feel that some of the reasons that there's a lot of anti-Americanism, is twofold. What's going on with the children, what's going on, what the Americans are telling, what they can do and what they cannot do. I mean, like I know right now we have the problem, or they say it's a problem in with the nuclear, in going into what country is it? All the different countries, and everybody wants to get into the nuclear, and we're telling who can go into it and who can't go into it, and who can have it and who cannot have it.
And again, it's part of the so-called arm race or nuclear programs or so forth that you allude to. It's all part of the policies of where again, some countries might want to develop their own programs or so forth, or this is just an example. It could apply to many things that they would like to do it their own way, but feel under pressure to follow, what the United States tells them to do. Well, you can have this, but you can't have that. And as a sovereign country, you feel like, hey, I should have the final say on what I want to do for my country or what kind of programs I need. And so that's also tied into the hypocrisy.
So maybe that's what we need, is more conversation. Instead of the Americans, the United States telling the countries what they can and what they cannot do, maybe if they had some kind of a conference. In fact, you mentioned to me there is a conference coming up that you mentioned that I would be interested in.
A forum, discussion.
And, with the Egyptian and Israel and right here in the United States. And that's the start. Having a conference together, talking to one another, not just telling what you have to do, but listen to the other person, and see their point of view, and maybe the two can get together in some way.
It is definitely, dialogue is very important, and the problem is, and I always say, and in my classes to my students, I always tell them, you need to see the other side of the story. So if the media focuses on certain aspects of the event, why don't you just put in a little time and effort to go and see the other side? Let's see what the Egyptian side is saying. Let's see what the Egyptian media is saying. What the American media is saying. Let's go to a different kind of media.
It's absolutely true, and I see that my directors here are giving me that our countdown. I see our everything is going on, so we have to close the show because things are coming down on the television right now. And I want to thank you so much, Jala, for coming to our show. And really, I want to invite you back because we just hit on, we're just touching base, and I see it's a half an hour, and we can't even negotiate our negotiations at this point yet. But I want to thank you because I think we need to see a different part of the media, which we're not seeing. We're only seeing one side, and I'm hoping that this show will show there are two sides. It's like a divorce. her side, his side, and the real side.
Yes.
So do come back again.
I will, of
And I
course.
love having you. And we need to talk more because we want to hear about the women's issues that are
Absolutely.
happening and what isn't happening and how we can get started with some of the women's issues that may need to be corrected
Get the dialogue
country,
started.
in our dialogue, because I think
Absolutely.
that's really, really important. And so, as you know, you'll give me a time when you can appear again, because I think everybody needs to hear that there are always two sides and three sides of every story.